Subcommittee on National Security will come to order. Without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. Veteran suicides continue to be a national epidemic. Veterans are estimated to have a suicide rate that's 50% higher than those who did not serve in the military. A major driver of suicide rates is the incident of post-traumatic stress among our veterans. According to the Department of Veterans Affairs, between 11 and 20% of those who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom and or Enduring Freedom suffer from PTS. Other estimates range as high as 29%. Veterans with PTS may be troubled by intrusive thoughts, avoid people, places, and things, and experience hyper-awareness and nightmares. They may find they are no longer able to trust and love those closest to them. Some may even feel that life is no longer worth living. Unfortunately, many veterans have met significant problems in receiving the health care they deserve. The issues regarding the inadequate treatment of veterans by the VA have been widely reported. These include long wait times and the overprescription of dangerous opiates. Identifying and utilizing the full range of effective treatments for veterans suffering from post-traumatic stress is something that the VA must do without delay. One treatment that complements existing therapies is the connection of veterans with PTS with service dogs. These are not comfort dogs or therapy dogs, as useful as those might be. Service dogs perform valuable services for veterans, calming them during a panic attack, turning on lights in a dark home, waking them from nightmares. Currently, the VA only provides service dogs to veterans with physical impairments. However, a 2010 VA Inspector General report stated that the VA, quote, faces challenges implementing the guide and service dog program. VA only started assisting mobility and hearing impaired veterans with service dogs in 2008, 6 years after being authorized to do so. VA personnel told us the actual demand for service dogs is unknown, end quote. With tens of thousands of veterans returning with mobility and hearing impairment from wars plagued by the use due to the use of improvised explosive devices and other things, this 6-year delay represents a stunning bureaucratic failure. The VA contends that there is insufficient evidence that service dogs help those with PTS. However, ample scientific findings and ongoing research suggest that the VA may very well be wrong. Service dogs are not intended to, nor do they cure PTS, but they provide a safe, non-addictive tool for veterans to live normal, functioning, productive lives, and they could provide a safe complement to existing treatments for PTS. The urgency of the veteran suicide rate demands that we explore this option. In 2010 National Defense Authorization Act, Congress authorized the VA to conduct a 3-year study on the efficacy of pairing veterans with PTS with service dogs. Instead of being completed in 2013, the VA study is not expected to be completed until 2019. According to the VA, the study has undergone, quote, multiple significant and unexpected challenges. The first phase of the study, referred to as Phase 1, began in 2011 and had to be suspended and restarted twice, once after 2 dogs bit children and again after dog health issues arose. The VA attributed these problems to issues with vendors contracted to provide the service dogs. Many of the dogs provided by the vendor were of substandard quality and had hip dyslapsia, a condition that could have been treated earlier if the vendor performed standard screening procedures. Of the 26 veterans that were enrolled in Phase 1, only 12 completed the study, and 4 more are expected to complete the study in February of 2017. The issues with Phase 1 could have been avoided if the VA had properly screened the vendors and had reached out to other public and private sector organizations engaged in similar ventures. Organizations like Canines for Warrior, which is based in the district I represent, do not experience these issues because of their experience in sourcing and training the dogs. Instead of conducting outreach, the VA insisted on developing its own veterinary standards for the study, but the Department of Defense already has its own military working dog standards. In fact, DoD is an internationally regarded trainer of dogs and has a team of over 55 personnel, including 14 veterinarians. Had the VA initially adopted DoD standards, the VA could have avoided the $10 to $12 million failure of Phase 1. While the VA eventually did reach out and adopt some DoD standards, it appears that development of its own standards was largely duplicative and wasteful. The VA began Phase 2 of the study in December of 2014 with numerous changes based on lessons learned from Phase 1. These changes included the VA hiring its own dog trainers to provide support to veterans throughout the study, incorporating DoD veterinary standards, and moving the study from one site in Tampa, Florida, to 3 separate sites in Atlanta, Georgia, Portland, Oregon, and Iowa City, Iowa. Yet the VA is only meeting half of its monthly recruiting goal of 12 veterans for this study. Similar issues echoed in the 2010 VA IG report. This problem is not based on a shortage of interested veterans, but instead on the VA's problems filling dog trainer positions and the alleged complexity of the study. While the VA is struggling to pair veterans with service dogs, other organizations are attempting to fill the void. In fact, the committee has spoken with various organizations that cumulatively claim to have hundreds of dogs that are trained and ready to be paired. Contrary to the VA's assertion that, quote, there is not enough research yet to know if dogs actually help treat post-traumatic stress and its symptoms, unquote, there is ample anecdotal and scientific evidence that service dogs can help veterans with PTS. Today, we will hear from witnesses familiar with that evidence and from veteran Cole Lyall, who credits his service dog with markedly reducing his PTS symptoms. Veterans cannot wait until 2018 for the VA to introduce a low-cost, low-risk, and high-reward treatment option. The problem of veteran suicide is too urgent. For this reason, I have introduced the Puppies Assisting Wounded Service Members Act of 2016, co-sponsored by many of my fellow committee members, including members on both sides of the aisle. This legislation would create a program for veterans with the most severe levels of PTS who try to VA-approved treatment and remain very symptomatic, to then be referred to an accredited service dog organization. The VA would reimburse the organization supplying those service dogs, and all funds expended would be offset with funds from the VA Office of Human Resources and Administration's expenses for administrative offices, conference planning, historic preservation, office artwork, and facility interior decor. Those who risk their lives for this country deserve the absolute best care upon their return, and time is of the essence. I'd like to thank our witnesses for their testimony today. We have veterans testifying and many joining us in the audience, and I want to thank them very much for their service. And with that, I will recognize the ranking member of the Subcommittee on National Security, Mr. Lynch, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you for holding this hearing to examine the efforts undertaken by the Department of Veteran Affairs to provide service dogs to veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces to assist with treatment for post-traumatic stress. I'd also like to thank today's panel witnesses for helping the committee with its work, and again, thank all our veterans in attendance and active military. It is the mission of the Department of the VA to serve and honor the more than 21 million dedicated men and women who are America's veterans in fulfillment of President Lincoln's historic commitment to, quote, care for those who shall have borne the battle and for their widows and orphans, close quote. With the formal end of the U.S.-led combat mission in Iraq in 2010 and in Afghanistan in 2014, the return of over 2.7 million veterans from extended service in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, and other war zone deployments, the fundamental duty of the VA to provide dignified care to American veterans and their families remains as critical as ever. In turn, our continued and bipartisan oversight of the VA is essential to ensuring that the agency is able to carry out its important mission. As most recently evidenced by the generation of post-9/11 veterans returning from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, effective treatment for post-traumatic stress, also known as PTSD, is one urgent area of veterans' health care that the VA and Congress must continue to strengthen. According to the VA's National Center for Post-Traumatic Stress, 20% of our veterans who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom or Operation Enduring Freedom have PTS in a given year. The prevalence of post-traumatic stress among our Iraqi and Afghan veterans is primarily the result of multiple tours of duty and repeated, severe, and constant combat exposure. Moreover, the VA has reported that veterans with PTS are particularly vulnerable to the risk of suicide, which continues to affect veterans at a devastating rate. Last month, the VA Undersecretary for Health, David Shulkin, again estimated that every day approximately 22 veterans take their lives in this country. And that is tragic. Similarly, the Department of Defense reported last week that suicide rates for active duty service members remain high for the 7th year in a row, with 265 active duty service members lost to suicide in 2015. We are clearly failing to meet our obligations to our returning and active service members. The impact of post-traumatic stress in our veterans community is a complex and far-reaching issue that demands a comprehensive approach to treatment and rehabilitation. This includes robust funding for the VA to continue to expand its mental health services, and I was proud to join the Chairman to support the bipartisan omnibus funding bill passed by Congress and signed by the President Obama at the end of last year that would provide $50 billion for VA medical services and specifically targets mental health care and suicide prevention. We must also encourage the development of common-sense alternative solutions that could further assist veterans with PTSD rehabilitation. One alternative is the topic of today's hearing, providing service dogs to veterans with PTSD to help alleviate their related symptoms. As noted in the American Medical Association Journal of Ethics in June of 2015, initial academic studies have revealed that veterans paired with service dogs report less severe PTSD symptoms, stronger social relationships, decreased substance abuse, and other increased health benefits. Pursuant to the Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2010, Congress itself mandated the VA to conduct a 3-year study, as noted by the Chairman in his remarks. That study was to examine the benefits of using service dogs for the treatment of rehabilitation of veterans with physical or mental injuries, including PTSD. Regrettably, as the Chairman has noted, the VA encountered numerous challenges in getting this study off the ground, including inadequate oversight over its service dog vendors and inconsistent service dog training standards. As a result, again, as the Chairman has noted, the agency now expects to complete the study in November of 2018 or into 2019. I understand the VA is taking steps to address these problems. However, a delay for a study of this importance for this amount of time is simply unacceptable. And I look forward to examining the progress of this further study with our witnesses. I also think that the Chairman's idea of going forward with a pilot program, which can be based on the evidence in hand today, is a great way to go at this problem. So I'm proud to co-sponsor 2 pieces of bipartisan legislation that have been introduced in Congress to facilitate the use of service dogs to assist our veterans. Chairman DeSantis, my colleague on this committee, has introduced H.R. 4764, a bill to require the VA to commence a service dog pilot program right away that is specific to post-9/11 veterans with severe PTSD, and I'm proud to join him on that. Also, Representative Jim McGovern of Massachusetts has also reintroduced legislation to establish a grant program to assist nonprofit organizations in developing and establishing service dog programs for veterans. And, Mr. Chairman, I would ask unanimous consent if I could please submit Mr. McGovern's legislation for the record.
Without objection.
And there's a supporting statement into the record as well.
Without objection.
Thank you, sir. As evidence continues to show that service dogs are one way of helping veterans with PTSD, I certainly support the expansion of these efforts. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for holding this important hearing, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman and thank you for your support for the efforts. I will hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any members who would like to submit a written statement. We will now recognize our panel of witnesses. I'm pleased to welcome Dr. Michael Fallon, Chief Veterinary Medical Officer at the Office of Research and Development at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Mr. Rory Diamond, Executive Director of Canines for Warriors, Mr. Cole Lyall, a U.S. Marine veteran who has post-traumatic stress, and Mr. Steve Feldman, Executive Director of the Human Animal Bond Research Initiative Foundation. Welcome to you all. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you please rise and raise your right hands. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. All witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. Dr. Fallon, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to update the committee on progress in the VA PTSD service dog study, which pairs veterans with PTS with service dogs. I am accompanied today to my right by Dr. Patricia Dorn, Director of the Rehabilitation Research and Development Service, and Dr. Chris Crow, Senior Mental Health Consultant and Liaison to the DoD Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and TBI. The 2010 National Defense Authorization Act directed VA to undertake a study to assess the benefits, feasibility, and advisability of using service dogs for the treatment or rehabilitation of veterans with physical or mental injuries or disabilities, including PTSD. The benefits of utilizing service dogs and guide dogs for physical disabilities are well established. Therefore, VA designed the study to focus on veterans with PTSD because PTSD is a high-priority health issue in veterans, and the benefits of service dogs in assisting people with PTSD are not established in the scientific literature. This is a groundbreaking study that aims to determine if veterans with PTSD would benefit from a service dog. For the study, VA hired its own dog trainers to provide obedience and handling support to veterans after they receive a dog, thus reducing experimental bias in the study. VA also developed its own contract health, behavior, and training standards for dogs. 3 study sites, Atlanta, Iowa City, and Portland, Oregon, are operating and enrolling veterans from different parts of the country. Approximately once a quarter for 21 months, measures are taken of self-care, interpersonal interactions and social participation, the severity of PTSD symptoms, sleep-related problems, suicidal ideation, the severity of mood disorders and substance abuse, anger directed at others, inpatient and outpatient visits, medication usage, and measures of employment and work productivity. Veteran enrollment in the multi-site phase of this study began in December of 2014. As of this week, 109 of 220 veterans have been enrolled in the study, and all 3 study teams will be fully staffed to achieve an enrollment rate of 12 to 15 veterans per month, which would allow all 220 veterans to be enrolled by the end of this year or early 2017. Data collection will end in late 2018. The data will then be analyzed, and the results will be published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. While VA does not purchase service dogs for veterans, VA does provide veterinary care benefits to eligible veterans to manage a visual, hearing, or substantial mobility impairment to enable the veteran to live independently. Currently, VA does not provide veterinary care benefits for PTSD or mental health dogs because research has not shown them to be effective in overcoming specific functional limitations. The carefully designed VA study is incredibly important in addressing shortcomings in the existing research literature that has been reported by others. VA continues to monitor other scientific literature for quality evidence to inform future policies and remains strongly committed to completing the current study at an estimated cost of at least $12 million. VA is strongly committed to the delivery of the best care for veterans with PTSD. Advances in research have led to a range of effective treatments that reduce symptoms and increase functioning and well-being. The VA-DoD evidence-based clinical practice guideline recommends the following as first-line treatments: trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, such as prolonged exposure, or PE, and cognitive processing therapy, or CPT, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, stress inoculation, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and venlafaxine, a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor. Research demonstrating the effectiveness of PE and CPT is particularly strong. VHA Handbook 1160.01, Uniform Mental Health Services in VA Medical Centers and Clinics, requires that all VA medical centers provide access to either PE or CPT. VA has supported this requirement by training upwards of 7,000 therapists in PE and CPT as part of a broader initiative to disseminate evidence-based psychotherapy for mental disorders. Uptake of evidence-based therapy such as PE and CPT across the VA healthcare system was rapid. For veterans who choose other treatment approaches, VA offers a range of options to treat PTSD and associated symptoms. VA is a leader in developing evidence-based therapy, the global standard for PTSD treatment. Mr. Chairman, as a veteran myself, firmly committed to the successful completion of this study, I appreciate the opportunity to appear before you today. I and my colleagues are prepared to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fallon. Mr. Diamond, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, members of the committee. We are absolutely thrilled to be here to talk about this very important matter. My name is Rory Diamond. I'm the Executive Director of Canines for Warriors. We are the nation's largest provider of service dogs for veterans with PTS, traumatic brain injuries, and/or who have been victims of military sexual trauma. With me today is Brett Simon, a founder of Canines for Warriors and the current head of our Canine division. We also have two of our graduates. We have Joe Svoboda, an 18-year Army veteran who did 3 tours in Iraq, and he's with his service dog, Lily. I also have with me Adam LeGrand, a 10-year Air Force veteran who helped men and women in uniform as a medic. He's with his service dog, Molly. As has already been mentioned, statistically speaking, 22 veterans are going to commit suicide today. That's why Canines for Warriors exists. We were founded by a mom. Her name is Sherry Duvall, and she was worried about her own son's PTS. 5 years later, Canines for Warriors has grown into an organization with 36 dedicated staff. We have a 9-acre, 17,000 square foot state-of-the-art campus in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida. And most importantly, we have a track record of helping hundreds of veterans overcome the symptoms associated with PTS. Importantly, we are very successful at preventing veteran suicide. Every warrior that comes through our door gets the family treatment, I would say. They get a service canine, they get equipment, training, certification, seminars, legal instruction, vet care, housing, home-cooked meals. We have house moms who listen to them. We have house dads who provide advice. And frankly, we have a full wraparound services and follow-up for the life of the dog and the life of the veteran. At Canines for Warriors, we say we always have our veterans' backs, and we absolutely never charge our veterans. Our program is 100% free. We've had 2 independent sets of researchers evaluate our program. These are PhDs who've looked at the efficacy of our program, have come back with the exact same conclusion. The program works. The dogs are effective. Let me just provide a flavor of this. The average Canines for Warrior applicant is on 10 to 15 medications. Fully 92% of them will reduce or eliminate those medications after receiving their dog. 73% of our graduates improve their overall health. 85% will handle anxiety better. 82% report having fewer suicidal thoughts and suicidal ideation. 77% report a reduction of nightmares or night terrors, finally being able to get a full night's sleep and being able to get back on a life cycle. As Adam LeGrand, who is behind me, says about his service dog, Molly, she gives me the ability to be a father and a functioning member of society again. And as Joe, who's behind me, also says, I just wouldn't be here without Lily. She is the light in the darkness of PTSD. So when we hear and read on the VA's website that there is, quote, not enough research yet to know if dogs actually help treat PTS and its symptoms, we fundamentally disagree. There is not a void of research in this regard that we don't know whether or not a service dog can help mitigate the symptoms associated with PTSD and its associated comorbidities. There is enough research. Canines for Warriors is an example of how that can work. Given the current crisis of veteran suicide in America, we think it makes sense to err on the side of providing more options for our veterans. What is the harm here? The very worst thing that could happen is a veteran ends up with a dog. But the VA's response is something that we have seen over and over and over again, that there is a reluctance to agree that this can work. Our warriors report to us, and they come from all over the country, 42 states, 150 cities, and we ask them all the time, tell us, how is the VA treating you? How is your PTS being treated? And this is what they tell us, and it's shockingly similar and frustrating to hear it over and over again. They wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they finally get an appointment. Then they go and get their appointment at the hospital, and they wait hour after hour after hour, and finally, they get in front of a psychologist or a psychologist or a clinical social worker, and they have their moment. And let's understand what this moment is. This is the one lifeline our government is giving these veterans to recover from PTS. This is their one chance. And do they get 45 minutes of a discussion of the wonderful panoply of options that we just heard Dr. Fallon talk about? No. They report to us, they get 10, 15 minutes maybe. The first question is always about, how are your meds? And then I guarantee you they walk out with another prescription drug. The VA has 3 responses to the PTS crisis in America: drugs, drugs, and more drugs to help you with the drugs we already gave you. That is the response, and we find it unacceptable. The VA, in our opinion, has fumbled the first round of the pilot program. In our opinion, we have no confidence that they will successfully pull off the second round. We see an immediate veteran suicide crisis today. We believe the time is now, not after the VA gets their act together, but right now, to start saving these lives. We appreciate the Chairman's leadership on this issue, and we'll be happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Mr. Lyall, you're up for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chairman DeSantis, Ranking Member Lynch, distinguished representatives of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify. I'd like to begin by saying that I'm not here for myself. I'm here strictly for my brothers and sisters still struggling to transition to post-military life while also struggling with post-traumatic stress and no other options besides drugs and therapy. I'm here for those of us in the veteran communities who have been left behind and continue to deal with the pain of suicide as other veterans see no way out. I'm here for the veterans who have lost faith in the system, lost hope for themselves, and have lost purpose in their lives. I'm here for the men and women that, like myself, have had to go it alone and acquire their service dogs at extraordinary financial burden to them. For these reasons, I've been fighting for the last year to change the existing VA policy. I believe that allowing veterans to fight PTS without all options available to them is tantamount to sending our military to fight an enemy without a secondary weapon in their arsenal. While in Afghanistan for the majority of 2011, my unit served in the Kinetic Helmand province. I was based out of Camp Leatherneck, but spent some time with the British and ISAF forces near Marja on a Royal Air Base in Lashkar. My physical injuries as a result of military service are insignificant relative to my fellow veterans. But like many veterans today who show little signs of physical injury, there are many scars beneath the surface. During the last few months of my deployment, as our replacements were starting to arrive and take over the operational capabilities of our unit, I felt I wasn't doing enough to help the cause of our warfighters. I started volunteering my time, largely during sleep hours, at a severely understaffed Bastion Trauma Center. It was there, mentally unprepared for the new volunteer role I assumed, that has affected me most in my post-deployment transition. Upon returning stateside, veterans take a post-deployment health assessment, which indicated that I needed to seek treatment for post-traumatic stress. I started to utilize the VA system, and eventually I met with a psychologist who confirmed the preliminary results of the health assessment. I was then prescribed sleep aids and antidepressants and told to utilize what is called a veterans center in my local area for counseling. A little less than 2 years on this path, the symptoms seemed to stagnate or get worse. Upon discharge from the Marine Corps in early 2014, interpersonal relationships were harder to maintain than necessary, along with not having the support system of my fellow Marines and the chain of command. I didn't have a civilian job, was not in school yet, and simultaneously was experiencing a divorce. In the same few months, I would experience what most veterans now are all too familiar with: the loss of military friends to preventable suicide. Many of these veterans had gotten addicted to the slew of pills prescribed to them and lost even a glimmer of hope in their lives. Some of these men and women had spouses, had children, mothers, fathers, and friends they left behind because the status quo of treatment for post-traumatic stress failed them. Life as I'd known it had been ripped away, and one night alone, I decided to end it all. It is only for the timing of a friend, a fellow Marine, arriving on my doorstep at that exact moment that I'm here right now. Semper Fidelis, indeed. The next day, I quit medication cold turkey, not wanting to continue down the dark path of opiate addiction. I sought another way and found that a trained service dog was an option, but not one provided by the VA. Further inquiry to local nonprofits similar to Canines for Warriors resulted in wait times over a year, with the demand being as high and nonprofit-based budgets what they are. A few months after searching myself, I got Kaya, who's at my feet today, who quite literally pounced into my life. I had her obedience trained, then subsequently trained for post-traumatic stress symptoms by an Assistance Dogs International accredited trainer. After roughly $10,000 all told, with my family's assistance of my own money, I got the help I needed. Yet today, many veterans still don't have those resources. I still have my bad days, but with Kaya at my side, I'm largely in a different phase. I call it recovery. Retired Marine General James Mattis calls it post-traumatic growth. The bad days are less frequent than they've ever been, and they mainly come when I get news of another friend who has committed suicide. Since starting this quest, more and more of the veteran community have come forward to impart upon me the stories of their brothers and sisters who have taken their lives. Just last week, a close friend of mine in Texas lost a Marine he served with to suicide. A month ago, one of my best friends who I deployed with and the father of my goddaughter admitted to me that he had gotten close and also would have succeeded had another Marine not stepped in. They all come to me pleading, in fact, begging, to use what voice I have in this chamber and in the halls of Congress to give you all this message. Service dogs will save lives. And with the current epidemic of veteran suicides, it is unconscionable to keep the status quo and wait any longer to institute this change we all know is a viable solution to reduce the epidemic of veteran suicides. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Feldman, you're up for 5 minutes.
It's a tough act to follow. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lynch, members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm Steve Feldman. I'm the Executive Director of the Human-Animal Bond Research Initiative, that's HABRI for short. We're a nonprofit research and education foundation that funds research on the benefits of companion animals to human health, and specifically we're looking at children with autism, we're looking at victims of domestic violence, and we're looking at how we can use these animal-assisted interventions for veterans with post-traumatic stress. In addition to funding this research, we also have built and maintained the world's largest research library on human-animal interaction, and that's free and online and available and searchable to anyone who's doing research in this area. And we also support common-sense public policies that should reflect the definitive body of science that show significant positive health impacts that companion animals have on human health. The VA says it doesn't have enough evidence to support service animals for veterans with PTS. We respectfully disagree, and that's why we support H.R. 4764. We believe there is significant scientific evidence to support the efficacy of service dogs for veterans with PTS. We funded the first systematic review of research on animal-assisted intervention for victims of trauma. That was conducted at Purdue University with Dr. Fallon's alma mater. And it was published less than a year ago, and what it found was preliminary evidence that animals provide unique elements to address PTS symptoms. And I think it's also really important to note, because Mr. Diamond said, what's the harm? This systematic review of published and unpublished research found no negative effects from any of these studies. So no harm was found in any of the research that we looked at. So we think this supports the conclusion that service dogs for trauma survivors, including veterans with PTS, can positively affect depression, anxiety, social outcomes, sleep, and quality of life. And we're currently funding a pilot study on the effects of service dogs on mental health and wellness in military veterans with PTS. Scientists are measuring psychological and psychosocial functioning, including symptoms of PTSD, depression, life and relationship satisfaction, and quality of life in 137 military veterans diagnosed with PTSD who either have a service dog or who are waiting to receive one. And the ones that are waiting to receive one is our scientific control group. And so the preliminary unpublished results indicate that military veterans with service dogs exhibit significantly lower overall PTS symptoms severity, and that includes better ability to cope with flashbacks and anxiety attacks, reduced frequency of nightmares and less overall sleep disturbance, lower anxiety, depression, and anger, higher levels of companionship and social reintegration, increased overall psychological well-being, and higher levels of life satisfaction and resilience. And we have to wait for the final results of this study to be published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, which we expect to happen later this year. But we wanted to bring you these preliminary outcomes because they're so encouraging and so important to the discussion today. I also urge the committee and the VA to look broadly at research studies that really look at several key measures of mental health and well-being, like depression, anxiety, stress, and social integration, all of which are associated with PTS. My written testimony covers these in great detail, and you can find even more studies in our database. And that's why an organization like HABRI can be hopefully really helpful, because we're looking at the broad spectrum of research, not just one little narrow slice of it. And that broad spectrum of research is pretty definitive. You know, for example, we're looking at what's happening in a person's brain when they interact with an animal. The level of oxytocin, which is a good hormone, goes up. The level of cortisol, which is the stress hormones, go down. So when fingers meet fur, there's something really fantastic that's happening, and I think we've heard about some of those specific examples today. You know, if you combine those scientifically documented therapeutic effects with the trained actions of a service dog, you get a powerful combination. The Americans with Disabilities Act recognizes service dogs for PTSD in their regulations, and states are increasingly updating their definition of service animals. Just last year, the state of Florida passed a law to expand protections of service animal statutes to include traumatic brain injury and PTSD. And the inclusion of these protections allows veterans who have a disability that may not be outwardly visible to have access to public accommodations with their service dogs. Sometimes these symptoms manifest themselves in public, so while pets and emotional support animals can provide some of the benefits we've just been discussing, it's only a trained service dog that has full public access that can provide that animal-assisted intervention wherever and whenever it's really necessary for a veteran with PTSD. You know, what about the doctors on all this? We did a survey last year which showed that of 1,000 doctors, which showed that 69% of them have worked with animals in hospitals, medical centers, or medical malpractice, and 88% of doctors saw improvement in a patient's physical condition, and 97% saw an improvement in a patient's mental health condition as a result of animal-assisted intervention. So doctors are likely to be really supportive if we can get this program going, and really willing participants as we provide service dogs to veterans with PTS. So I just want to conclude by saying there is a growing body of research that demonstrates widespread positive mental health impacts from the human-animal bond, and we hope that you and the VA will take this broad evidence into consideration when shaping public health policy, both in relation to 4764 and beyond. And I hope the members of the subcommittee and the VA will rely on HABRI as a resource. That's what we're here for, to be a scientific resource for anyone who's interested in this. With PTS affecting so many of our veterans, we need to make sure that everyone has access to service dogs. And H.R. 4764 really is a great step in the right direction, and that's why we fully support the legislation. So, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Lynch, members of the committee, I really want to thank you. I want to thank your hardworking staff, and especially, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your leadership on this issue, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. I thank the witnesses. The Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes. Dr. Fallon, so why does the VA reject pairing veterans suffering from PTS with service dogs?
We don't, Mr. Chairman. VA is thrilled that service dogs help veterans. It's just as a large medical organization, we have to rely on evidence-based medicine. The veteran population is very heterogeneous. What helps one veteran is not going to help all. We have to
has any of the preliminary results that have been pointed to by the witnesses at Purdue or any of those, has that changed any of the thinking within the VA?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would point out that in the publication that was funded by HABRI, Dr. O'Hare published in 2015, one of her main conclusions was that more research needs to be done. That's right out of the paper. She also documented a number of deficiencies in literature. She also was quoted in a Military Times article on her work that non-biased research needed to be completed. This was in 2015.
So that said, so the VA's approach to PTS, is it fair to say that it relies heavily on pharmaceuticals?
I'm a veterinarian, Mr. Chairman. I couldn't read.
But you're not familiar with how these veterans, so basically you're here as a veterinarian, you don't have as much knowledge on just PTS generally?
No, Mr. Chairman. My role here is to update you on our study. I certainly would not pretend to be an expert in human clinical medicine.
Okay. Well, because I think all the indications we've received from witnesses, from veterans, are that, that you get counseling, you get drugs. I mean, that's kind of the two things. And that's effective for some people, but there are other people, and I think Lyall is one that will say that that's not good. So, Maybe you can't answer this, but are there dangers associated with providing veterans opioids and other pharmaceuticals to deal with PTS?
I couldn't comment on that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Well, what would you say to that, Mr. Diamond?
If you look at the Wikipedia entry for some of these opioids, they clearly set down an entire list of side effects, including increased suicide. In our opinion, a dog is not going to cause any harm, and yet we see every single month our classes, the warriors are transforming. They come in and they're a wreck. They're over-medicated. They are lost. They're frightened just to have left their homes. And we see them over 3 weeks working with our staff, working with their service dog as that bond kicks in, that they become different people. And they're able to go out the front door again. They're able to go to a store again. They're able to go to the beach in Florida again. And these are things that they could not do without their service dog. It opens the door. It lowers barriers to even getting other help. They become more like the people they were before they went off to war.
Mr. Feldman, can you, the opioids, I mean, is there dangerous side effects with that? Is that accurate to say that that's the case?
I think pretty much everyone knows that, but I do want to respond to something that Dr. Fallon said. You know, we're here in Washington, and so there's a lot of people who do regulations. You're never going to meet a regulator who says we have enough regulations. You're never going to meet a researcher who says we have enough research. So of course we need to to continue to do more research, and that's what we're funding right now. But when you add it all up, we really do think there's enough research to substantiate this program.
Has there been any research that substantiates dangerous side effects with pairing a veteran with a service dog?
No, sir. There's, in fact, an absence of that evidence.
Lyall, have you had any negative side effects since you've been paired with your service dog?
That's a strong negative, Mr. Chairman.
So, I mean, I think we all agree that veteran suicides are a major problem. We need to do everything we can to prevent them. And I think it makes sense that the VA should explore all possible ways that this can be dealt with. And I understand that there may not, people can say, well, we need more literature, but we have enough evidence there that I think it's something that is long overdue. Let me ask you this, Mr. Feldman. How is the VA's opposition to providing service dog harm veterans with PTS?
Well, I guess I'll just speak as a citizen on this one. I just don't think the words veteran and waiting list sort of belong in the same sentence. And while, Canines for Warriors and other organizations like it are doing their best to put as many paws on the ground as they possibly can, the only way we're really going to get this done is if we have the VA providing that kind of support.
What about Mr. Diamond? What's your judgment about the VA's posture? How has that affected veterans?
It's caused lives. There's no question that there are thousands of veteran suicides that could have been prevented had they had the access to a service dog.
And Lyall, I know you've been involved in advocacy on this issue. You've gone through the halls of Congress and spoken with people. What's been the reception from members of Congress on both sides of the aisle so far?
Mr. Chairman, the response has been overwhelmingly supportive. We have bipartisan support on H.R. 4764. This is not a partisan issue. Everybody knows that we need to take care of our veterans. Of course, we have different ideas about how to go about that. But I personally, walking the halls of Congress and speaking with Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, liberals, everybody agrees that this is a good idea and that we should do it.
Well, you've done a very good job. I mean, as this bill progresses and we have success, some of these guys on K Street may be coming after you because of your success and work in Congress. And Mr. Diamond, I think Canines for Warriors has done a great job. It's a part of the district that I'm privileged to represent. And I know you guys have expanded and you're there to help, but I mean, you can only do so much. I mean, I wish you guys could just have unlimited numbers, but so you guys are part of it, but I think we need to have a broader awareness here. But I appreciate all the witnesses for their testimony, and I thank you guys for coming, and I now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, we had some hearings over in the Senate on veterans and opioid addiction, and this is a 2015 hearing. And in response to questions around opioid disorder by Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana. VA indicated that about 68,000 veterans today had, or in 2015, had opioid use disorders. The figure represents about 13% of the total population of veterans currently taking opioids, according to the VA. So that's a lot of veterans. If 68,000 have opioid use disorders, and that's 13% of the veterans on opioids, that's a huge, huge problem. A couple of the witnesses have mentioned the costs, and we just had an opportunity to go to Iraq last week, Anbar Province, and they had a couple of dogs they had trained, but those are trained for bomb detection. And but I asked the DOD. I said, "What does it cost for us to train a dog in that context?" And they said, $55,000 each. But that's DOD, and I'm not surprised that the private sector is doing it for a heck of a lot less. And it's probably apples and oranges. They get trained for something particularly different. But Mr. Lyall, first of all, thank you for your courageous service to our country, and you're helping veterans still. Is that what the $10,000 that you mentioned? Is that what it cost you to?
Yes, sir. That's what it cost me to acquire Kaya, to pay for her training and all initial veterinary care for her. I would note that $10,000.
Is that acquisition as well?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
I would note that $10,000 is, quite frankly, cheap.
Yeah.
For
the life of the dog and the benefit that it conveys. You're right. Absolutely.
Well, the $10,000, I would pay it 10 more times if I had to do it over again.
Don't let the DOD hear you say that.
But it has paid dividends in how I'm able to overcome specific symptoms associated with military experience, and I would recommend it highly to anybody who feels as though opiates and traditional therapies just aren't working for them.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Diamond and Mr. Feldman, Mr. Diamond first, you 17,000 square feet, I'm not sure. You mentioned your facility down in Florida, and obviously there are efficiencies of scale because you're training so many dogs. How many dogs do you probably train at a time?
Right now, we have capacity for about 30 dogs on our campus. In a couple of months, we'll have capacity for about 60.
Okay. And what do you see in terms of the costs of you, more professionally, doing it 30 times at a whack? What do you see your costs on average?
Well, we're finally seeing economies of scale. 2 years ago, we were about in the 40s. This past year, we were at about $32,000. This year, $27,000. And then we expect next year for the entire 3-week program, plus all the lifetime wraparound services, to be about $22,000, $23,000. So we finally hit economies of scale. And I would echo Mr. Lyall's comments. We think that it's a savings to the government with the reduction in the use of prescription drugs, reduction in use of VA services, generally speaking, and just merely the higher quality of life, the better human being you get at the end of it is a huge cost savings for the country.
Yeah. And what's the lifespan? The average lifespan of one of the dogs?
It's between 8 and 12 years.
So
depending
10
on
years, yeah. Mr. Lyall, you had something else?
Congressman Lynch, I would note that 8 to 10 years, Kaya started helping me within weeks.
Yeah.
It does not take 8 to 12 years for these dogs to really assist veterans.
Oh, no. I mean, they're training you throughout that 10 years or so. So that's the service that's being rendered. You divide the cost of training and acquisition over the 10 years. You amortize it, I guess. Mr. Feldman, you have anything else you'd like to add?
Well, you mentioned cost. I can tell you that the pilot study looking at 137 veterans, which we announced the funding for last year and which will be completed next month and probably published later this year, that whole study cost just upwards of $50,000. And we're getting results, within a 2-year period. And so, yes, we need to do more research, but it doesn't have to take that long or cost that much.
Yeah, you see the number of veterans that we're treating with opioids, and there's just no happy ending there with the addiction rate we have. So we got to try something different. My time has expired. Thank you for your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and the Chair now recognizes the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Russell, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you each for being here today. Dr. Fallon, I noticed that you served in the military. Thank you for your service. Sure. When you did serve, you served in a veterinary capacity, as I understand it. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was a veterinary technician.
In that time in your service, did you develop a bond with the animals under your care?
Oh, absolutely, sir. Yes.
And would you say that now, as a doctor of veterinary medicine, do you develop a nurturing bond with the animals in your care?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. Do you see dangers associated with pairing service dogs with veterans?
Well, as the chairman mentioned, I have seen problems with dogs, particularly dogs that are not properly trained. For instance, we had those 2 children that were bitten, which was a tragedy. Certainly didn't help those veterans. Also, there are some things to take into consideration. If a dog becomes sick, ends up with a chronic illness, there can be huge veterinary bills associated. The veteran can actually become quite depressed. We've seen this anecdotally.
And how would you compare that, say, with veterans suffering from opioid abuse, harming their families, their own children, maybe harming others around them and getting in a depressed state? Which would you say is more of a danger?
I couldn't comment on that, sir. Again, I'm a veterinarian. I mean, yes, clearly all those things are terrible things, though.
Do you personally believe veterans would be harmed by their care and association with service dogs?
I do not know the answer to that question.
But you have a lot of experience here, Dr. Fallon. I mean, you served in the military dealing with animals. You're a doctor of veterinary medicine. You've handled a lot of animals in your life. You've done extensive research and study. I just want to know, since you came as a expert testifying before Congress, I'm just curious of your personal opinion.
I'm reluctant
Do you
to give
personally
my
believe
personal
veterans would
opinion.
be harmed by their care and association with service dogs?
I'm reluctant to give my personal opinion, sir, because it could affect the study, could bias the study. So I would prefer not to do that.
Well, I think that that's telling, and I appreciate you for being loyal to Veterans Administration. But I think we have a greater responsibility as a nation to be loyal to our combat veterans and those that have suffered a great deal. I've handled the flesh and blood of battle on many battlefields, to include Iraq and Afghanistan. As a combat infantryman, I've dealt with a lot of the issues that we're discussing here today. As a veterans advocate, before entering a career in politics, I guess if you call it a career, I've even assisted and helped place service dogs with veterans and seen dramatic results. Whether that is a placebo effect or whether it's reality, I can tell you that the results have been remarkable. But here's what I also know. Opioid abuse is a tragic indictment on the Veterans Administration. I would also tell you that many veteran suicides, I think, are misdiagnosed. It's not unlikely for a soldier maybe to drink a beer, but now he's prescribed on Oxycontin or Percocet. He diminishes himself to a very low state. He doesn't breathe anymore, and then the family finds him in the morning. It's like, well, gee, Russell didn't have any indication that he had any problems. In fact, he was talking about going fishing this weekend, and now he's dead. And they chalk him up as a suicide. Here we have an opportunity to do a great deal of good with very low risk. And if the price of that is 2 dog bites, I think we can do that. And I also think that the expense of a dog is far cheaper than years and years and years of opioid addiction. We are legalizing heroin in this country, and we're using our veterans as the #1 scientific lab of opioid abuse. It really angers me. And I've been prescribed Percocet and Oxycontin, floated around for several days, and I'll tell you this, I quit cold turkey too on it because I would rather have a clear head and pain than deal with a drug addiction and depression. I think we're not being intellectually honest here today, and whether Dr. Crow would like to give his professional opinion, if you can't speak to the medical side or yourself, give me one good reason why we should not implement this absent the already given opinion of further study.
Dr. Crow, would you like to?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You stand and just raise your right hand. Can you stand?
Yes, please.
You swear the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Okay. Witness answered in the affirmative.
Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, the ranking member, and the committee.
If you could do your microphone, sir, and thank you for being here
Can
today.
I push this? Okay. Thank you very much for the question. First of all, I think we're mistakenly confusing a couple of issues. Opioids are not used to treat PTSD. A lot of folks with PTSD also have chronic pain conditions, and they may have started opioids to treat the pain. But opioids are not used by VA to treat PTSD. We also monitor prescribing practices and send in experts to facilities where we think there's some mispractice going on in an attempt to correct it. We also, as you may know, we have the opioid rescue kits that now are being put in the hands of every veteran who's been prescribed opioids. This is also a very personal issue for me. My sister died of an unintended opioid overdose, so I take this very seriously, but it's not part of our PTSD discussion.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you, sir, for your insight with your.
Before you do your next question, can you just state your full name for the record so we have it?
Dr. Chris Crow.
Okay, thank you. What's that? And your title?
Senior Mental Health Consultant and Liaison to the Defense Centers of Excellence for Psychological Health and TBI.
And thank you, and I appreciate your patience with being put on the spot, but I understand you did come here as well today. Look, this is a real issue, and I don't believe anybody sitting out here or up here doesn't have concern and care to do the right things. But would you also, in your professional opinion, acknowledge that those that deal more than likely with PTSD issues are also liable to be suffering from some sort of pain due to their service? So these two are associated together. Would you agree with that?
Not necessarily. You know, I think they co-occur in many people. Folks who've been deployed, have many opportunities for injury and come back with lots of musculoskeletal pain. Those also tend to be folks who've been exposed to trauma and may develop post-traumatic stress disorder. But opioids are never used to treat PTSD.
Well, and I will take you at your word for that, but I will also, absolutely put it to you that people suffering from PTSD are often drugged in a great deal of medications, with a basket load of issues and problems. And being good soldiers or sailors or airmen or Marines, they take their medications. They follow the doctor's orders. Well, Mr. Chairman, I've exceeded my time, but I would like to say these programs, there's far more evidence that they work than they don't. And there's an awful lot of evidence that we are not doing a very good job with our treatment of PTSD, and that we have a lot of veteran suicides. I believe, personally, just from observation, I only come as a combat veteran. I'm not a doctor. I've just fought for a living. And so what I would tell you is we are not meeting those types of issues, and we are trying to drug our veterans, send them off to some clinic, rather than get them engaged in something productive. And with your indulgence, thank you, Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman's time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes, and we are going to have Dr. Fallon come back and resume his spot on the witness stand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Fallon, do you have any idea how the VA is recruiting qualified veterans for the study?
The veteran participants, sir, the folks that are
Correct.
actually, yes, sir, they're recruited through each of the 3 medical centers. through flyers and presentations to mental health clinicians.
Okay. Is there currently a waiting list of qualified veterans who would like to participate?
There is a waiting list at one of our sites, the Portland, Oregon site, because we've had particular problems in recruiting qualified dog trainers for that site. However, we now have one trainer that is working now.
How large is the waiting list?
I cannot say for sure. I would say it's probably in the range of maybe 20 people, perhaps.
And this is at one facility or?
One facility, yes, sir.
Okay. So are you saying that the personnel at VA medical centers are aware of this study and are actively engaged in informing veterans of the potential of having a service dog?
Yes, I would definitely say that. It's a very popular topic of interest with our veterans.
Does the VA currently have any way to gauge the demand for the service dogs?
We do not, sir. We do not have a method of gauging demand for service dogs.
Is that under consideration?
That would be outside of my purview, sir. I couldn't say.
Mr. Diamond, let me come to you. How are qualified veterans referred to your organization?
We've never advertised for a veteran to come to our organization. They find us through word of mouth, through the very tight veteran community. But when the veteran applies to us, we have a 22-page application. We do interviews, criminal background checks. We do a thorough vetting process. So by the time the veteran comes to our campus, perhaps a year after they applied, we know a bevy about them and are ready to bring them into our program.
So you don't do any advertising per se, it's all word of mouth?
Absolutely. If we advertise, we would get inundated. We're pushing a 2-year wait list now.
All right, that's my point. That's where I was going. So the VA doesn't seem to have a whole lot of information here. Of course, it's not been their program, but you are actively involved in providing service dogs to veterans, and you have a 2-year waiting list. How many, do you have any way of gauging what the need is?
I wish we had the good measure, and since I'm under oath, I'm not going to venture a guess, but I do know this for sure, that the number of veterans that are referred to us from the VA because a VA treating physician says, I don't have anything else that can help you, is increasing every single day.
Sure, absolutely. Mr. Lyall, let me ask you, and first of all, thank you for your service, for your testimony. Both are powerful, and we deeply and in a heartfelt way say thank you for what you have done for our country. How did you find out that service dogs were an option for PTS?
So I actually had a personal friend of mine who had a service dog that he also had to acquire on his own and train. I'm not quite sure which organization he received his dog, well, where he got his dog trained. But I knew that that was something that was an option that veterans could utilize. And then when I went out to organizations, specifically I went to organizations in Texas because that's where I'm currently living. I got pretty much the same result, that wait times were at least a year, and I didn't feel as though I had that time to wait.
Okay, so your introduction came through a personal friend.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, Mr. Diamond, let me come back to you, and my time is almost up. Twofold question. Do you find that veterans struggle with affording service dogs as a general rule? And how does your organization enable them to pair up?
Two pieces to that. The first is that some of our veterans have reported back to us that they would rather make personal sacrifices than to not have to forego having a service dog. But they do struggle. They're on fixed incomes, and therefore they do have difficulty paying for it. Most of the veterans that we get could not independently pay to get a service dog out on their own. So we've made a lot of partnerships with our corporate supporters. For example, Bear Health is put together a network of veterinarians to give free health care for the dogs. We're trying to work with pet stores to get free dog food for the veterans. We do everything we can on the back end to make it free or almost free for the veteran, but the overwhelming message from them is they would forego their own personal comfort to make sure that they have a service dog.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Lyall, what was your experience with the drugs? How did you get prescribed by the VA?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, when I took the post-deployment health assessment, which was the preliminary, what they give you, I'm not sure the timeline, but there is a timeline that the VA is required to give that once you return stateside. I then went to a VA facility in Fort Worth and tried to use their system. I eventually met with a psychologist at the VA hospital in Fort Worth and was prescribed the sleep aids and the antidepressants.
But why did they do that? Was it because of your symptoms?
Correct. So when I returned, I was suffering from recurring nightmares, and I would have acute anxiety attacks. I also just had difficulty with close interpersonal relationships. As I had mentioned previously, one of the side effects that goes largely unnoticed as a result of post-traumatic stress, there's a high divorce rate amongst military members, but that also had affected me. It wasn't the direct cause of the divorce, but it definitely did not help in any way, shape, or form. So it was affecting my personal relationships. The nightmares specifically, Kaya is trained to recognize when I'm having a nightmare, and she will jump up in bed and lick my face to wake me up. So that's one of the ways that she has assisted me in my symptoms. And I would further note that a dog can give you a sense of purpose that a pill will just not ever do, in the sense that there were many days I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't have really anything to do. Like, as I said, I didn't have a job at the time, wasn't currently enrolled in school, and I didn't have any reason to. But a service dog needs to be taken outside. They need to be fed. They give you a reason to get up and to be productive on a day-to-day basis, and give you that small sense of purpose again that you can grow on. And again, I reiterate that that's something that pills just did not do for me.
So, because we had testimony before that this is not something the VA is doing, providing drugs. I mean, I guess, do you disagree with what was said in your case?
Could you repeat the question, Mr. Chairman?
There was the previous witness to Mr. Fallon, when we did the little musical chairs, said that that is not something, drugs for PTS are not something the VA does. But in your instance, is that what they did, or?
Well, my issues as a result of post-traumatic stress, as I said, were recurring nightmares, and I got a sleep aid as a result of those nightmares, so I would disagree with that.
Okay. Mr. Diamond, so I mean, the bill that we have, if you're down to 22,000, that's even more than what we're doing, so that's good. So you're confident that you'll be able to continue to reduce the costs of each dog?
Yeah, I would hate for our donors to hear that, but yes, we have hit economies of scale sufficiently that our efficiencies are in the low 20s for next year.
Okay, good. Mr. Feldman, what do you, I mean, I guess, what is your recommendation for making the case? You're familiar with the research that's going on. What more in Congress do we need to be finding and presenting, or do you think that there's enough facts already in existence to justify moving forward?
Well, we're continuing to do research, and we'll come back and share the published research that we gave you a preview of today. A pilot program, as you've written into this bill, is a really good way to go, because you've built in some evaluation, you've built in a report on that program as part of the legislation. So it's a chance to continue studying, but also to help a lot of folks. So that's why we support it.
Great. Well, look, at the end of the day, there has been a lot of anecdotal evidence. There's some evidence coming out in some of the literature, but here's the thing. I could understand why that would be a cautionary tale if there was somehow a negative side effect to this, but there's not. So the worst case scenario that we're talking about is we've made some veterans happy with service dogs as companions. That's like the worst case scenario. And obviously, if there's a positive effect, you're actually giving veterans a sense of purpose and I believe saving lives. And I'll just tell you, since we've been involved in this issue, I've had multiple veterans come up to me and tell me that they would have probably committed suicide but for being paired with a service dog. And so it's not often people look you in the eye and tell you that they probably would have done that. And so it really, really registers when you hear that. Mr. Lyall?
And Mr. Chairman, I would also note that just being a veteran, any veteran will probably tell you that they have, any veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan will probably tell you that they either have a friend or a friend of a friend that has committed suicide and has been affected by this suicide epidemic. This study that was done by the VA, I will also note, back in 2013, that indicated the 22 veteran-a-day average committing suicide. That study was based on 21 states. So the number, tragically, is higher than 22 veterans a day. That was just a side note. But I will also say, since I've been doing this, and you know, I have been talking to members of Congress, friends of mine, specifically in Texas, because the cost barriers are so high to getting your own service dog. And many veterans join the military to get that family, that sense of community. When they get out, they don't have it anymore. They don't have the, you know, the family support that I had to financially support their endeavor. And then they get told that there are wait times over a year and they don't feel like they have that time. So they go out and they just get a dog. And I will note, as I believe it was Mr. Russell, who had, Congressman Russell, who had said earlier that just being around a dog, Dr. Fallon, as a veterinarian, has said that he's made personal connections with the animals that he's been around. I would argue that if you don't think or believe that a dog can be therapeutic, and a service dog specifically can treat certain symptoms specific to their post-traumatic stress, then you probably have never owned or been around a dog.
Appreciate that. Did you want to go real quick? I'm going to recognize Mr. Hurd, but if you're going to go, I'll just recognize you. All right, I'm going to recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The way this is structured under the chairman's bill, the key relationship will be the VA and the contractor, if it's Mr. Diamond and Canines for Warriors or any other group. The 2016 VA report said that there was a problem with the VA not getting out to the contractor location where the training was going on, or to the home of the veteran with the dog, and that broke down. Are we able to cure that defect in further studies, in the existing study?
Yes, Ranking Member.
Yeah,
absolutely. The problem was that we were relying on the service dog organization's trainers to interact with our veterans, and that resulted in us not getting timely information about problems that had developed with the dog pairs, which is why we now have hired our own dog trainers.
Okay. Thank you.
Chair now recognizes a gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hurd, for 5 minutes. And the votes have started, but we got 13 minutes, and so Mr. Hurd, and then if there's other questions, we may have time for other members too.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'd like to thank the distinguished gentleman from Florida for having this panel, and I'd like to thank Mr. Lyall for being here. He's from my alma mater, Texas A&M University. Gig'em Aggies, which has a long history of working with animals to improve the lives of humans, everything from Texas Task Force 1, which is one of the most active urban search and rescue teams. You have a student organization called Aggie Guide Dogs and Service Dogs, which promotes the use of service dogs. And we're also part of the Tex Vet Network, which includes the Operation K9. And Mr. Lyall, first I want to thank you for your service and dedication to the safety of Americans. as a former officer in the CIA, I had the honor of serving alongside members of the military. I'm familiar with the sacrifices that you and your family make, and I know this is a life-changing experience and has inspired you to give back to your community, and I appreciate you for doing this. My first questions, though, are actually to Mr. Fallon. Has the VA reached out to any other organizations conducting similar studies?
After the difficulties we had with the pilot study, we did site visits of...
The pilot study from 2006?
The pilot study started in 2011, sir,
Okay.
and was suspended finally in 2012. We realized we had to change our study protocol. We actually visited major organizations like Canine Companions for Independence in California.
My question is actually, let's start before that. Why did the VA decide to reinvent the wheel rather than relying on some other organizations that have a history in doing this kind of thing?
Well, for the pilot, sir, we relied upon the organizations themselves, all of which profess to be very experienced and to be able to produce high-quality dogs, and unfortunately, that did not turn out to be true.
And I don't even know where to go. Well, there's so many questions. Why not reach out to DOD and leverage some of the experience that they have? They have some world-class trainers, and they have world-class activities using dogs for all kinds of services.
Admittedly, we were not familiar enough with the service dog community when we embarked on the pilot study. There's no questions that we've made mistakes.
Say that again. Say that first.
We were not adequately familiar with the service dog community and the pitfalls in that community when we embarked on our pilot study. There's no question about that.
So how much money did the VA spend in Phase 1 to develop veterinary standards, and which I've been told are no longer in use?
I'm not sure the exact figure. It'd be somewhere above $1 million, though, in the pilot study.
Above $1 million or above $10 million?
No, $1 million, sir. The $12 million figure is for the entire Phase 1 and Phase 2 together.
And could that money have been saved if the VA had initially adopted DOD's veterinary standards?
No, sir, it wasn't just the veterinary standards. There were training standards involved, and also follow-up by the organization's dog trainers. All those things ended up to be a major problem.
Now, you're in the chief veterinary medical office, correct?
Yes, sir.
What proposals have you suggested up the chain on how to make sure we incorporate this into the VA?
Into the study, sir, or into VA?
Into the VA, so that more veterans can get access to this type of care.
Well, we were directed by Congress to do this study, sir, and that has been my focus, is to do this research study. There are other portions of the VA that have...
What's the best next action?
To complete this study successfully.
And what's the best next action there? What's the next step that you need to take in order to make sure this gets completed?
Well, we're doing them now, sir. I mean, we have retooled and learned from our mistakes.
When is it going to be done?
Pardon me?
When is it going to be done?
We expect the data collection to be complete by late 2018, and then the paper would be published thereafter.
Mr. Lyall, I have a little bit less than a minute, but you can go over a little bit if you need. Hopefully the chairman indulges my prerogative. Anything that has not been discussed during this hearing today that you think is important to get out there?
Well, thank you, Congressman Hurd. I think it's important to understand and to reiterate what I said, that a service dog not only will combat specific symptoms like Kaya does for me in waking me up from nightmares, et cetera, but there is an effect that they give to you of providing a sense of purpose. And when veterans get out, they lose their military community, they lose their chain of command, they get their mission, their purpose ripped away from them very, very quickly. And there's nonprofits have done admirable work in trying to assist veterans transitioning, but they're still struggling. And I think the main reason is that they lose their sense of purpose and they lose their mission. They don't have anything driving them anymore. And I think a service dog also provides that. I will just further note very quickly that I've spent the last year doing this trying to raise awareness about the issue, talk to members of Congress, have been received very well. And it's taken me a year to do this, funding all of this myself. We don't have until late 2018 to have this study completed and then understand the results and then try to have a program initiated at that point. 22 veterans a day are committing suicide. Anybody that is okay with that number, I wouldn't say that anybody at the VA is okay with that number, but we have something that we know works. We have evidence that works now. And with 22 veterans a day committing suicide, I return to what I said in my opening statement, that it is unconscionable that we don't explore alternative methods of treatment.
Mr. Lyall, thank you. Mr. Damon.
Thank you.
Mr. Diamond, excuse me, thank you for your service. Mr. Chairman, I yield back a time I do not have.
Gentlemen's time's expired. I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to appear before us today. There's no further business. Without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.